I just noticed that none of us are from Ontario, which is interesting. There's usually always one when we do this, representing the center of the universe. But today we have an all-Western panel: 2 Albertans, one from Edmonton, one from Calgary, and one from BC, in and around Vancouver. So today's Off the Record, I guess, has a very of the West flavor.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, none of those people from out east telling us what to think and what to do, especially because their track record is pretty bad. Okay, I guess let's get started. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here on Off the Record. My name is William, and joining me this week we have Isaac and Alex, your all-Western team for this week's show, and we're excited to be talking about what made news in the past week. So first up, I guess big news out in our neck of the woods was Pierre Poilievre is going back to Parliament. He's got his seat. Isaac, why don't you tell us what happened?
Yeah, so this was actually kind of exciting to watch as the results were coming in there, William, because at first it actually looked like Poilievre was going to do better than Conservative MP Damien Carrick, and he almost did. It got really close because he ended up with 80.4% of the vote. And despite what we saw in the legacy media, William, I'm sure you'll talk more about this, but that they were propping up, I don't know how else to say it, Bonnie Critchley, who of course received less than 10%. She got 9.9% of the vote. And just to remind those, of course, this by-election was triggered when Damien Carrick resigned, and he won in the general election with 82.8% of the vote. So that's how close Poilievre came, despite legacy media pundits trying to frame this as, oh, Poilievre is going to get, like, I don't know, even if he wins with 50, 60%, it's going to be terrible for the Conservatives. This is not acceptable. But of course, we saw he pretty much did as good as Carrick did. And that was despite the 214 candidates in the riding, 201 of whom were with the longest ballot committee, which we're seeing continue to make waves. Whenever Poilievre is running, they don't seem to care if anyone else is. So, of course, Elections Canada had to issue write-in ballots. So this election was special in the sense that voters had to write the names in. And from the people I talked to on the ground, I guess there was lists of the names at least, because no one knew how to spell Poilievre. Of course, Elections Canada did say that if the spelling was close enough, it'd be fine, but writing Conservative wasn't enough. Either way, they actually tallied the results when they said they would. So the write-ins at least didn't delay the election that much, because I was honestly expecting it to take a week, because they had to have a special ballot counting process where they have to read the names. I don't know how they did it, but yeah. Were you guys surprised when you saw that Poilievre almost got as many votes as Carrick in this riding?
Alex, what did you see from your part of the world?
No, I wasn't terribly surprised at all. I assumed that Poilievre would win handily. I think it's kind of funny that he's the first person ever to get more votes than the next 213 candidates combined. So, however you want to slice that, I think it was a pretty remarkable victory. Of course, it's a very conservative place, and so it was a pretty safe seat for him to win. I think it's also interesting that Bonnie Critchley, as terribly as she did in the grand scheme of things, did much better than both the NDP and the PPC.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting to watch the legacy media's coverage of this by-election. Had you been solely following CBC and others of that nature, you might have thought that this was going to be possibly even a close race, that Bonnie Critchley was waging this aggressive insurgent, a guerrilla campaign, and she was winning over thousands of votes and really putting the heat onto Pierre. And Pierre, they were saying, well, what if he doesn't get to, what if he only gets 48% of the vote? What if he doesn't get any? And of course, it all turned out to be this complete bunk. CBC in particular wrote a fawning, lengthy profile of Bonnie Critchley, and I don't want to take away from any of her personal achievements, but the reality is she never really had a hope of winning in this very blue part of Alberta. And I think CBC should actually have had to have registered as a third-party advertiser for how positive their coverage of Bonnie Critchley was. And it did. It was an entirely manufactured, I think, controversy designed to try and destabilize Pierre, and to hurt him, and to make his return to Parliament be under this possible shadow, that if he had somehow only gotten 60% as opposed to 80%. I love that. There are parts of this world where 60% would be considered an amazing achievement in an election. But now, Mr. Ford, the Premier of Ontario, now normally we do have an Ontarian on this panel to talk about some of these things, but on the day of the by-election, he said that Poilievre should work with Prime Minister Carney because, boy, Prime Minister Carney is doing just this fantastic job when it comes to trade and dealing with U.S. President Donald Trump. What do we think of the quote unquote conservative Premier of Ontario basically campaigning for the Carney Liberals? Isaac, what does that say to you?
Yeah, I don't know what to think about Ford. I do kind of wish we had an Ontarian on the panel to balance us out here, but I don't even think people in Ontario really approve of Ford these days, because it just seems to me more and more as time goes on that he keeps siding with the Liberals. He keeps going against the Conservatives in many fashions. I don't understand. I certainly don't think he's a conservative. Certainly not. I mean, we live in Alberta, William. We have Danielle Smith, one of the strongest Conservatives in the nation, and then you look at Ford in Ontario, and it's just the other side of the coin. But just for this article, working with Carney seemed kind of a contradiction in a way, because Carney really hasn't done any work in my eyes. I mean, he ran his entire election on dealing with Donald Trump, and now he was the best suited to do that, only to get us the 5th worst tariff rate in the world out of hundreds of countries. We have the 5th worst tariff rate in the world. I don't even think he's talked to Trump. Trump said he called him. He didn't even pick up the phone. We recall Trump saying before the election that he wanted Carney to win. I think because, if I recall correctly, because he thought a Liberal government would be weaker and he could just push them around, which we're seeing from him. Really, he doesn't really have any respect for Carney, in my opinion, based on the interactions we've seen between them. As for Poilievre working with Carney, well, we'll have to wait and see until Parliament resumes. I don't know that we'll see them working together, but we might certainly see some fireworks in the House of Commons, because so far Carney's pretty much had a free ride. He's not in Parliament, of course. He has the legacy media writing about how good he's doing, but he's not really doing anything. So once the House of Commons resumes here, we're going to definitely see Poilievre go on the attack, I think, and say, hey, Canadians, listen up. This is actually what's happened so far. Here's the reality. Now that the legacy media is not telling you what's happening, here's the actual truth. Here are the facts, and here's what Carney has done, which is nothing. So I can't wait for that to happen.
You do have to wonder if Mr. Ford maybe misunderstands the traditionally confrontational relationship between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. The opposition part being in the name of the role. Right there. So, Alex, what do you think? What are all these great things that Mr. Carney has done to help Canada in this time of trade crisis? What are his successes?
Well, I can't think of any specific successes. I will defend Doug Ford a little bit on this, in the sense that most people in Ontario vote Liberal. I mean, the electoral results flesh that out nicely. And so he has to appeal to his constituents. It's the same thing as Danielle Smith, right? I mean, she aligns herself with the Federal Conservative Party because that's what her constituents like. That's politics, politicians doing politics. I don't find that particularly unusual. However, what I find egregious and outrageous about Doug Ford making this comment is we have had 2 weeks of Parliament sitting in Ottawa, going back to last year. How could he possibly say or urge Poilievre to work with Mark Carney when he can't? Parliament isn't even sitting. If he wants the leader of the opposition and the leader of the government to be cooperative, he should be urging them to go back to work.
Yeah, it does. One might think maybe Doug Ford, Premier Ford, is trying to curry favor because he thinks that'll get him some more money for social programs or infrastructure or whatever the case is. It is certainly not endearing him, though, to folks out in our part of the world where Mr. Carney remains not the most popular choice. I can say on behalf of Alberta, one thing that is driving a lot of us just nuts is these aggressive canola tariffs from China. And the fact that when it seems like an Ontario industry is under threat, well, goodness me, does our federal government move heaven and earth to try and help protect, defend, subsidize, nationalize, whatever it takes in order to protect it. But if you grow canola and sell it to China, a $43 billion industry in this country, and suddenly your largest customer says, no, we're not going to buy from you anymore, we're going to buy it from the Australians, well, it's just been crickets from the federal government. I think, people wonder why there's such alienation, Western alienation, the idea that the West doesn't always feel that it has a full voice at the table. I think it's because, honestly, at least with Mr. Carney doing these great things, well, he's not done a lot of great things for canola, at least since this latest round happened. Well, it will be exciting to see Poilievre back in the House of Commons. I think there's been a lot of people missing that. I like Andrew Scheer quite a bit. Voted for him a couple times here and there over the time, but I don't think he has quite the same maybe level of showmanship that Pierre has, which is required when you're in the House of Commons. It's to put on a bit of a show, make question period exciting again. That's our call. Okay,
let's just have question period again. I'd be satisfied with that.
Well, this is true. Well, endless ministerial announcements where they don't really announce anything is part of summer. It just isn't as exciting as question period. Looking at the next one, we saw a judge, and I think this was out in your neck of the woods, Alex. A judge stay a deportation order for an applicant for an immigrant to Canada who was being deported. They said, well, his wife has ADHD, and therefore if her husband gets deported, that could make managing her ADHD worse. So we're going to put a hold on that deportation. Alex, why don't you tell us a few of the details of what you think?
Sure. So yeah, this sounds like it would be a BC story, but it's not. This is actually Ontario. So yeah, they can actually take responsibility for this one. The judge in this case, her name is Justice Go, and she is an activist judge. She proudly regards herself as an activist judge. She previously worked as a lawyer on behalf of what she calls marginalized and vulnerable people, specifically immigrants. And she was appointed to the bar by David Lametti, who many people would also consider to be a bit of a leftist activist as well. He was the former attorney general, very, very liberal individual. And so I went through a bunch of her case studies, and this is not an isolated incident. She has stayed deportation orders many, many times, in particularly ridiculous cases. There was one individual, for instance, who had taken on a fake identity in Sweden for 7 years and had come to Canada and had overstayed her welcome, and she stayed her deportation order. There are all kinds of different cases. She's also denied some appeals to deportation as well. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I don't know if it's a great idea to have leftist pro-immigration judges in charge of adjudicating appeals to deportation orders.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would be surprised that someone with such an activist background would be appointed to the bench. You're sort of our crime expert there, Alex. You follow a lot of the days in and days out of justice. Canadians might be surprised to know that judges don't really have terms either, do they? Once appointed, they're there for life.
Yeah, and actually, I think also maybe our viewers would be surprised to hear my opinion on this. Most judges I have found are actually pretty good in Canada. I have a great respect for most of the judges that I've witnessed in court. But yes, you are right. They do not have terms. And unlike in some parts of the United States, they are not elected. They are appointed.
And in the case of you talk about the appointment process, that's a political appointment. It's very much within, it's probably not called a political appointment, but I say that because it's a politician who actually does the appointings. The Minister of Justice, pretty well as it has sole discretion when it comes to appointing judges.
I believe so, and I hope that this is correct. I think it was the Globe and Mail did a report on this a few years ago. Amongst the judges who were appointed by the previous two Liberal governments, I think it was more than 70% were not only Liberal voters, but Liberal donors.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly, I think, gives Canadians pause for whether or not justice is truly blind when its background appears to be activist and liberal leaning. Now, Isaac, we also saw Michelle Rempel sort of talk a little bit about the issue of immigration and criminal behavior, because I believe the story was an immigrant to Canada who had committed a crime got a more lenient sentence because a harsher sentence could jeopardize their immigration status. And Michelle Rempel, I believe, has put a private member's bill forward that would say that you really can't do that. Isaac, what's the case in that situation?
Yeah, no, Alex and I have talked about this before at various times because we see this happen time and again. But I mean, realistically, in my eyes, if you are in any way not a Canadian citizen and you commit a crime here, you should be deported immediately. Full stop. There's no question about it. I mean, of course, we're talking about jaywalking or something, but an actual crime like a criminal offense, you should be deported. I don't know why anyone would be against that. And I don't know, especially like we see in this case here, ADHD. I mean, it's ridiculous. Plus, you assume the man who's a non-citizen, I guess his wife is too. So just deport them together. It's not that challenging. Just you committed a crime, you got to go. It's that simple. Especially because, I mean, if we're in a crime-ridden country and all the people committing crimes aren't even Canadians, it's a really simple fix. Just get rid of the people committing the crimes. Just deport them. It is that simple. And it's ADHD. We're not talking about this person needs like full-time care. She's ADHD. I mean, I don't even get me started on ADHD, but I personally think that it's one of the most overdiagnosed things, especially for children. You take your kid into the doctor, they'll just give you something for ADHD and say, be on your way. I don't know about this person's specific diagnosis, but and then just getting back to the judges thing you were talking about there, Alex, this was something I was paying attention to heading up to the election, because people were saying with concern, if Poilievre were to win, that the cards were in a way stacked against him, with the judges all being liberal, the Senate all being liberal. I mean, the people in power in regard to crime jurisdiction are kind of all liberals. So then when you come in as a conservative government, it's like, what can you really do? Obviously, we're not in that case, but it could be something that could still occur in the future going forward here.
Yeah, no, there's an old joke that liberal governments really never lose. They just go into, they may not be in the Commons, but they're still everywhere else. They're in the civil service, they're in the judiciary, they're in the upper chamber, they're in the Senate. And so they just bide their time until they're back in the Commons again after those pesky interloping conservatives have been sent packing. Again. Now, we talk about this private member's bill from Michelle Rempel, and I understand sort of what her goal was, but I don't fully agree. I would say your immigration status should be taken into account when you commit a crime, but not because you should get a more lenient sentence. I actually think you should get a harsher sentence. I think coming to this country is a privilege. We welcome you here into a by and large safe, tolerant, pluralistic, peaceful society with, maybe not great job opportunities anymore, thanks to the current incumbent's government, but possibly better prospects than you have from where you're coming from, and therefore it's a privilege to be here. And if you abuse that privilege by committing a criminal act, I think we should, again, as Isaac says, being Senja packing, I think we should revoke the privilege of being here. And certainly it's very costly to keep people in prison. Those costs are borne by Canadian taxpayers. People who are in prison still avail themselves of our publicly funded health care. Sometimes they even accrue benefits like old age security while in prison. So all of that comes at a cost. And it's a cost Canadian taxpayers are bearing for people who are privileged to be here and have broken the law. So as we grapple with this immigration issue, I'm curious to see if we're going to see more situations like this. And Alex, what do you think?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think another concern surrounding this issue is that serial criminals, especially those who are guilty of repeat sex offenses, they seek out countries that are criminal safe zones for their activities. And my fear is that if Canada continues on with this extremely lenient attitude, especially towards immigrants, with regards to sex offenses specifically, Canada could become, in the eyes of those individuals, those sickos, a safe zone for that type of activity. We also have a lot of vulnerable people with our lenient immigration system. We have a lot of human trafficking here. So you have a combination of vulnerable people and a lenient justice system that lets people literally get away with murder. We're just going to invite more and more horrible people to this country to do more and more horrible things.
Yeah, I think, that is not the reputation Canada wants. Certainly, I don't think what most Canadians want. Maybe a small number would say, bring all the criminals here. But I don't think they're the majority. And I think you're absolutely right that a justice system that isn't seen to be fair and effective, it just is a problem not only for those involved with it, but for an entire country, for the social fabric of it. So a third thing we have had to laugh a little bit about happening was there was a TransFest that was supposed to happen. I'm still not 100% certain. I know what a TransFest is, but it looks colorful from that picture there. But and it was supposed to be held out on Vancouver Island, then it was canceled. And it wasn't canceled because of any issue related to transgender identity. There wasn't a big debate around, trans medical care, or should minors get puberty blockers or hormone therapy. It was canceled because the TransFest wouldn't take a stand on the Palestinian Gaza issue, which, to someone outside the trans community, I did have to wonder, what exactly does the conflict in Gaza have to do with trans issues? Only other than the fact that if you were transgender in Gaza, under the control of Hamas and the Palestinians, they would throw you off the biggest building they could find, because that tends to be their attitude towards anybody in the LGBTQ community. They certainly don't have the same welcome and tolerant position. So, and I guess one of the sources of discontent was one of the people involved in the organizing of TransFest had also supported some Jewish and Israeli organizations, and that apparently was a source of ire for the transgender. So now, Isaac, make it make sense. Why should the TransFest care or have an opinion on the Israel-Gaza conflict and the fight against Hamas?
Yeah, you're asking a lot there, William, to make it make sense. But yeah, no, I don't. There's a few things. First of all, as you said, any LGBTQ groups fighting for anything to do with Palestine and being pro-Palestine makes no sense. They will literally kill you there. It's like the Queers for Palestine group. It's kind of a paradox in a way. You support Palestine, they go there and see what happens to you. You won't be coming back. Like it really is that simple. This isn't some figure of speech. They don't accept you as you are in Palestine, unlike Canada, where you're safe to be whoever you want to be. But I just think, I don't know, I've seen over the last few years, let's say, that the weaponization of the Pride movement, really activist groups like a pro-Palestine group, for example, would be an activist group, have used Pride just to fight for whatever they want, really. I don't know why that is. I guess they see the group of people and the activists within Pride as weaponizable, like they're already fighting for a cause. You just shift the cause. At first it's climate change, and then it's whatever, and you could just kind of move the goalpost and they're still just picketing, rioting. It's like, I don't get it. As for this TransFest, what does this have to do with the Israel-Gaza conflict? That is a question that I don't think really has an answer.
Now, Alex, what you live in and around Vancouver, which is pretty different, I would say, than than Alberta here. What are your thoughts on this particular situation?
Yeah, so I'll try to maybe answer Isaac's question, and to the best of my ability, I'm going to try to play devil's advocate here and maybe just put myself into the shoes of the TransFest folks. So I think the reason they think, and I'm totally speculating here, I think the reason they think that Israel-Palestine conflict is relevant to TransFest is that they view the world in a very kind of Marxist lens, right? So there's the oppressor and the oppressed. And they identify as the oppressed, and so they can take any issue around the world and they can distill it down into this like very, very simplified view of the world, right? And in their opinion, Israel, because they have an asymmetrical amount of power compared to Palestine, are the oppressors and Palestinians are the oppressed. Therefore, they identify with the Palestinians, and nobody is allowed to disagree with them on that. And that's where I think it really, like, their argument kind of falls apart, because they present themselves as the most accepting and tolerant people. And you would expect that to be the case. I mean, it's TransFest, for heaven's sakes, right? I mean, you'd think that they would be very, very, very progressive and accepting of all types of people, but they're not. They don't let you have your own opinions on Israel or the Middle East. They don't let you wear dreadlocks. My friend was just recently kicked out of some 2S LGBTQI plus theater because she had dreadlocks, and they said that it violated their cultural appropriation policy. Just all kinds of nonsense. So they're, yeah, the most intolerant people you can find in some respects.
Now, Alex, I did want to ask you specifically about that story you wrote about the woman who had dreadlocked hair and was accused of cultural appropriation. I can't help but notice how many non-Palestinian members of the LGBTQ community are wearing keffiyehs. And wouldn't that be an example of cultural appropriation? So shouldn't that venue, and I guess any others who purport to oppose cultural appropriation, therefore ban any keffiyeh wearing individual from any event or property that supposedly opposes cultural appropriation?
Well, you know, it's wild because their cultural appropriation policy, which I tracked down, and by the way, this individual who was barred from the event was not my friend originally. I just found her and reached out to her, and she's actually a very, very reasonable person. So we found all of these policies to try to figure out what the rules were. We're still not really sure, but they had a list of all kinds of things you can't wear. Saris were on the list, for instance. I assume turbans would be on there. Certain things, you know, they don't want you wearing an Indian headdress when you come in. Okay, fair enough. But keffiyehs were not on the list.
Huh. What a surprise. Almost like there's a double standard on this issue.
Well, it's also a drag show theater. I mean, their entire shtick is people pretending to be things that they're not. Like that's they're all raised in Detra.
Can you appropriate a gender, I guess, is the question then? Is that perfectly
yes.
okay?
As long as you don't appropriate their race along with the gender, I suppose, is
right.
The rule. But black people can. So because it's all based out of their anti-blackness policy. So a black person can have a blonde wig. That's fine. And again, this goes back to this kind of reductionist way of viewing the world, right? Where you have oppressors and oppressed. And so you have two different rules and two different attitudes, and purely based off of power dynamics.
Frankly, it all sounds exhausting, is my attitude. Now, this wasn't the only, of course, gender issue to surface this week. We saw the example of a nurse, Amy Ham, who dared to utter the hate speech that there are, in fact, only two genders, male and female, and that what you're born with is what you are. And that ended up costing her nearly $100,000 in costs and fines levied against her by the nurses. I guess I shouldn't say union, Nurses Association. So the question is, though, again, Alex, you know, as our crime reporter, you see a lot of terrible criminals in a given week, and you know, arsonists, assaulters, people who steal tens of thousands of dollars in property. Are the fines for those dangerous, violent crimes anywhere close to $100,000?
No, the average surety I see for like a stranger attack is generally between $500 and $2,000.
So say at the upper end, $2,000. You know, you could commit serious bodily harm against 50 people and be equivalent to the societal damage of telling people there are two genders, of being J.K. Rowling in the nursing profession. So, Isaac, in your view, what insanity is this that stating a biological fact that there are two genders somehow now nets you from a quote unquote professional association fines and fees up to $100,000?
Yeah, and again, William, we're talking about a medical professional here. This would be like a doctor coming into the room when your child is born and saying, "Do you want to know if it's a boy or a girl?" Boom, 100K fine, two genders. That's it. That's all you can have. I mean, it's ridiculous. And of course, Amy Ham previously said, or she sided with J.K. Rowling. God forbid, J.K. Rowling, who has the best-selling book of all time behind the Bible, the Harry Potter series, the best-selling book of all time. I mean, this is insane. And something this reminded me of actually was, I think this was just leading up to the election. Pierre Poilievre had the gusto to say that there were two genders. You'll recall he was in an interview and he was asked about this, and he said, "Oh, I only think there's two genders," or "I only know of two," or whatever the exact wording was. And I think, Alex, it was you maybe asked Carney a similar question, and which he sidestepped. But one thing I wanted to mention quick, William, was just last year, I think at the end of last year, in Alberta, we passed a law that essentially regulatory agencies, so I think that would apply to the nurses associations here, cannot do this, cannot fine people for politics, for anything like this. So I think, I don't know the exact details because it was a while ago that I wrote the story, but I don't think the Amy Ham fine would have occurred if she lived in Alberta because of those laws, assuming they're passed and stuff. But yeah, do you know about that, William? Would that have been, is that true?
Alberta is moving forward with a whole suite of legislative changes to protect, not just government-funded professionals like nurses and teachers, but basically to, in effect, say this cannot be labeled hate speech. You cannot take someone to a human rights tribunal and file a grievance based on the statement of fact. And Alex, I was going to say, you did famously, of course, ask the Prime Minister this very question at the one leaders debate we were allowed to attend until the legacy media had a meltdown that there were non-legacy media allowed to talk to the Prime Minister. When will he be paying his $100,000 fine? Have you heard from Prime Minister Carney on that?
Well, so it's a great question. Okay, so first of all, we have to make a little bit of a correction here. So we're doing a bit of an apples and oranges thing here, because a surety that you pay in court is obviously different than a fine. And in this case, it's not really a fine. It's a bit of a misnomer. A legal penalty being applied by a self-regulatory body. So in that legal penalty, I believe they're trying to get back the legal fees that they accrued, putting this nurse through this terrible case of lawfare. So bit of a apples and oranges comparison there, I think, that we should address. I find it really, really crazy that they bothered spending $100,000 taking this person to court. She has no cases of professional misconduct. I think that the scope of these self-regulatory organizations should be very limited. It should be for the purpose of if a nurse abuses a patient, right? Then in that case, we revoke your license. That's what the purpose of these self-regulatory bodies are. It's not to regulate people's speech or their ideas or their politics. It's really that simple. And there's a case actually going through New Westminster Supreme Court right now of a doctor who has been accused 4 times of sexually assaulting his patients. He has been through 2 criminal trials. One is currently underway. He was actually acquitted in the last one, so his new allegations have not been tested in his court, and he was deemed not guilty on the last one. But nonetheless, the College of Physicians has allowed him to continue running his pain clinic, even though he's almost run up half a dozen sexual assault allegations. So that just shows, I think, that these self-regulatory bodies maybe have lost sight of what their purpose ought to be.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And in the case of some organizations, the one I'm most familiar with would be, say, the Alberta Teachers Association, and I suspect it's the same for a lot of others, where their professional association is also their union, and therefore it becomes really hard to distinguish what is something a union would do, which might be to pontificate endlessly on what people should think or should feel. I mean, CUPE appears to, when it's not standing up for Air Canada's flag attendants, it does spend an awful lot of its time weighing in on the Israel-Palestine conflict, for example. But in the case of, I think if you're out there playing politics on what people should think on these sorts of issues, it really undermines the professional association role, right? Because now suddenly you think, well, but they're going after Amy Ham and she believes what I believe. And so does that mean that I'm going to get a nurse who, if they discover that I don't subscribe to this gender orthodoxy of there being many, many, many genders and it being an entirely social construct, am I going to have my care compromised because that nurse will vehemently disagree with where I stand? So I do think there are legitimate concerns about the role of professional associations, the limits on their power or lack thereof, and what that actually means for the people who are supposed to be protected. I mean, that's the role, right, of a professional association. It is supposed to safeguard the public interest to ensure that people performing that profession are doing so in a qualified, competent, and careful manner. So, either one of you, please weigh in and let me know what you think.
Well, I actually listened in on some of the hearings with Amy Ham. This was about a year ago between her and the College of Nurses and Midwives. And all self-regulatory organizations, or most of them anyway, tend to have this philosophy of you can't do anything that brings disrepute to the organization. So we had this in finance, for instance. So they want you to avoid engaging in political activism of any kind, really. So you can kind of understand why that would be the case to some extent. But with Amy Ham's case, like this all started because she put up a billboard that says, "I love J.K. Rowling." But she didn't say, "My name is Amy Ham, I am a nurse and I love J.K. Rowling." I don't think anybody would know who put up that billboard if the College of Nurses and Midwives hadn't engaged in this giant witch hunt. So they're the ones bringing disrepute to the organization, not Amy Ham. I mean, she was essentially an anon. She was an anonymous person voicing these opinions until they decided to engage in this really weird witch hunt.
And like I said, Alex, J.K. Rowling has, again, the best-selling book of all time next to the Bible. I mean, it's not some ludicrous statement to say, "I love J.K. Rowling." I'd say most people do based on those numbers there.
And I would certainly suggest that professional associations, regardless of their intent, have to also understand the fundamental freedoms every Canadian enjoys, protected by our Constitution and the Charter, including the right to free speech, even speech that you might not occasionally agree with or fully support, which for those on the left, I know that part really rankles them.
Well, of course, free speech rights only exist to protect the speech you don't like.
Yes.
Yeah, that was well said, William. Everyone wants to say how much they support free speech, and then you ask them, well, what about this? What if someone said this? Oh, now I don't support free speech. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either you support it fully or you don't at all.
So we have freedom of speech, which I think most of us on the right cherish as an important protection. What about freedom to drive and freedom from oppressive bike lane maniacs who systematically ruin cities with their bike obsessed agendas? Now, Isaac, you've done some work on this week. What is happening in Edmonton?
Yeah, where do I start, William? Obviously, I published 2 articles over 2 days there about what's going on in Edmonton, and they're really, in my opinion, trying to push this forward just before the municipal election or just around there because, well, of course, I'm a member of this Delta neighborhood, which got slapped with these pamphlets yesterday that said essentially we're pushing forward. We're trying to complete this project by the end of the year, which I felt was fast-tracked, perhaps in light of the municipal election, which is, of course, in October of this year. They were going to finish right around then. So, and that's despite the members of Delta, of our community, sending the city a petition with a clear majority of residents signing it, saying we do not want these bike lanes. Now the city's saying, actually, you do. You don't know what you want. We polled you guys, and trust me, this is what you want. So one of the community members, Margarita Goslin, sent them a letter to that effect, basically saying, you're lying. Here's a quote from her. What is especially troubling is the city's repeated misrepresentation, both in correspondence and through media statements, claiming that all residents of the neighborhood were consulted, which of course is not true. But yeah, no, and the city citing their research, which I found their numbers interesting, because apparently they had an online survey that was completed by 50 people. But conversely, the neighborhood here had a community hall with like 4 times more people than that, opposed to the bike lanes again. And then they said the city had an in-person event where 11 participants gave feedback. Again, 11 participants versus the town hall we had that had like 200-300 people. And again, the petition that Delton submitted to the city clerk had 292 signatures. So really showing a discrepancy in numbers there. And I don't know, the city's basically saying it doesn't. Oh, another thing. Goslin, the lady who sent the letter there, she went into the city's feedback that they did online, their survey there, and it had nothing about bike lanes. Can you believe that? It was talking about speeding, shortcutting, illegal U-turns, vehicles not coming to complete stops, things like that. But there was actually nothing about bike lanes. So even the research they're citing didn't actually discuss bike lanes, believe it or not. And look, this is a big problem for the community. I've talked with the lead organizer a few times, Jeremiah Rawling, and he basically said, well, the number one concern is, of course, there's a lot of handicap parking, a lot of old people here. They're going to lose their parking. I mean, I drive down my street. There's handicap parking all over the place. And also just emergency services. Look, they're taking a lot of the, like, I have the map here, actually. Not that this will tell you anything, but essentially they're turning a lot of the streets into one ways or no traffic. So there's nowhere for the emergency vehicles to go. Evidently, he actually laid out the way the closest fire truck would have to travel, and it just completely ruined. Now they wouldn't be able to go that way. So this is actually impeding emergency services verifiably. So he said, quote, it actually has the potential to put lives at risk due to delayed response times for emergency services, which is way worse than losing parking. So yeah, this could actually put lives at risk, but also slow down traffic, which is terrible. If anyone's driven in Edmonton lately, it's a nightmare. I often have to drive out to my mom's place there on the weekends, which is out of town, and just driving on Yellowhead West there. I mean, it's terrible. The whole thing's under construction. The whole city's under construction. Wherever you drive, it's terrible. They're building bike lanes. They're building LRTs. They want to have this fantasy world where we're like San Francisco, as if there's not snow on the ground 9 months of the year in Edmonton. It's -50 outside in the winter. Nobody's in the bike lanes. This is, I mean, and then I'll just touch on the economics.
We're going to cut you off from the rant
Okay.
because we're running out. Now, Alex, you're out in the West Coast, also sometimes called the Left Coast. What is your view of bicycle lanes? Probably different living in and around Vancouver.
No, not different. No, we hate them too. So I used to live in Penticton, and Penticton's a beautiful place. If you ever go there, it's like one of the only cities sandwiched between two lakes, very picturesque. We installed these bike lanes, and it almost like destroyed the entire town. They actually had to pass a moratorium on talking about bike lanes. We're not even allowed to talk about them anymore because people were getting so upset. City council said no more talking about the bike lanes until I think like 2027. Speaking of, limiting people's free speech rights. And then there's this other issue with bike lanes too, where there's always this philosophy among city planners: if you build it, they will come, right? That does not apply in this particular instance. So much like Edmonton, it snows like 8 months to 9 months out of the year there. So you can't really use the bike lane. So instead what we have, because Penticton, much like the rest of the province of BC, has a lot of homeless people, is the bike lanes have become these like dystopian pathways for people pushing their shopping carts and their makeshift shelters. So when you drive around in the winter, it's just like the most horrendous thing to see, right? Because now that's what they use it for. And occasionally older folks using it for their Segway, or what do they call those? Is a Segway? Is that
their scooters, their little mobility scooters? Yeah. You do have to laugh that city council bans talk about, in the list of contentious issues, it wasn't gender/trans rights. It wasn't Israel/Gaza. It was bicycle lanes that resulted in a suspension of the constitutional right to free speech. And I do think bike lanes, I mean, I have to laugh a little bit because I used to work with a Calgary municipal advocacy group. It was called Save Calgary. And when we really wanted to get people all amped up, we would put out a newsletter, a weekly newsletter, and talk about bicycle lanes and all of the things that bicycle lanes do. I mean, they eliminate street parking because you're converting the parking lane usually into then a cycle track. So for anybody who's trying to park around a small business, coffee shop, bakery, what have you, there's no longer any parking. It means you can't turn right on a red light anymore because, of course, that means crossing cycle tracks. And so, you know, in the grand scheme of things, maybe not, but 3 or 4 of those intersections on your commute home that you would normally be able to do, maybe your commute's 2 or 3 minutes longer than it used to be. And we all know how much people love hanging out in traffic. And there is more traffic now because instead of having 2 lanes each way, is 1 lane each way, right? The other one now occupied by the cycle track. And, you know, all of that being said, if there were tens of thousands of cyclists cramming onto those cycle tracks, I think most of us would probably grumble, but say, well, look, at least it's providing a service to people. But it's not. I mean, I live on a cycle track. There is one outside the front door of my building, and no cyclists use it. Why? Because it doesn't happen to be a very convenient way to get from most parts of downtown where I live to another part. The bicycles drive on the road, where, by the way, they used to for hundreds of years. They used to just bike on the road, and most of them were perfectly fine. The ill-behaved ones occasionally got run over by cars, but by and large, that was their fault for not obeying traffic rules. So because the cycle track isn't going exactly where they want, nobody's using it. And I think, well, great. Calgary has spent, like Edmonton, and I'm sure every other big municipality has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on cycle tracks, and they're just sitting empty 19 times out of 20. So, guys, final words on the cycle track thing. Do you think we're reaching a tipping point? Do you think we're going to turn the corner? And, you know, we can only hope. Do you think one day we'll even see some of these being uncycled tracked back into actual roads?
Yeah, well, of course, William recently, probably about a month ago, Gondek called them temporary, which is ridiculous, of course, considering we spent hundreds of millions of dollars on them. Edmonton's have an $11 million annual maintenance cost. So to call them temporary, like they're just some pylon you can remove, not dig up the whole ground for years again and get rid of them and turn them back into lanes. I mean, it is insane, but I do feel the tide is shifting on that, which is why the Delton being pushed forward was so ridiculous to me, especially with the transportation minister and all the mayors now saying we don't want these bike lanes, but I mean, here they are.
Alex, final thoughts. Are we returning to sanity, or are we doomed to bike lane madness?
I think that the pendulum swings, and so I hope that it does with regards to bike lanes. I think what pisses people off so much about the bike lanes is kind of similar to what pisses people off about the trans insanity, right? Is that it's a tyranny of the micro minority. Like, this is less than 1% of the population want this, and yet we all have to dole out a significant amount of money to assuage this tiny group of people. Why do they have so much power?
It's a great question, and one I think taxpayers in cities will continue to ponder as they see their property tax bills go up every year, and the only thing we seem to get in return is cycle tracks. So I want to say thank you very much to Isaac and Alex. We've had a lot of fun today. You can always check out our work. It gets published on junonews.com, and we will see you again next week. And just a reminder that everything we've said has been off the record. There is a small group of people who watch and read True North products who are deeply pro bicycles. And
really,
yeah, I mean, I say a small minority. It might be 2 or 3 people, but they have fearsome ability to comment and send correspondence on it, because I guarantee you, when this gets published, there will be a tiny but vocal group of people who love everything else we do but hate us over cycle tracks.
You know what? Go ahead, Isaac.
Alex, yeah, you said it was a micro minority, that being less than 1% that support it. Interestingly, the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Chris Sims, told me if there was a referendum on it province-wide, she thinks it'd be an 80-20 vote in opposition. So that would indicate 20% support. But then Dreeshen in the same line has cited the number of people that use this. It is less than 1% of traffic or whatever. So really, I mean, we're catering to the minority is beyond an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, it depends where you go, too. In Montreal, there's bike lanes everywhere and tons of bicyclists. And it actually operates pretty well, just because it's been a long cultural element of the city, right? Like they've been bicycling forever. So maybe, I mean, maybe we'll all just get used to it. We'll all start bicycling eventually. Who knows?
Having parts of it, of course, that are also hundreds and hundreds of years old. Without time to build up an urban core that supports some of this cycle infrastructure, as opposed to cities like, say, Edmonton and Calgary, who, 300 years ago, all you would see here is grass. So that might be a difference.
Well, Vancouver, they're quite tolerant of it too. But Vancouver, I just learned this recently, is one of the only major cities in North America that doesn't have a highway running straight through its downtown. So it's always been a nightmare to drive downtown Vancouver. Almost nobody does it. Right, like you're better off just parking outside of downtown and then taking the SkyTrain or the bus in or whatever. So,
well, I'm sure there'll be more to say about cycle tracks in the future. Much as we would want, they aren't going anywhere.
No. I'm curious what it'll be like when they finally lift that speaking ban. Bike lanes. There's a lot of page there.
Oh yeah, Alex, I was waiting for the cops to show up at your door. We hear you talking about bike lanes.
No, that's real though. That's totally a real thing. I couldn't believe it. I think they banned it for like 5 years.